Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial video on building a game in LÖVE 2D. So I know it's been a little while since the last video, but unfortunately I was very busy with other things and really couldn't give this the time it needed. So I'm very excited because today we're going to film a two-part video where we're going to essentially add some really cool features. Mainly, we're going to create a very basic menu system for us to be able to essentially select different things from. And then in the second part, we'll essentially, based on selection that's been made, we'll be able to add these game objects to the screen. So just to kind of showcase what that's going to look like, let me pull up a working demo of this. So here we have our game, we have our Yeti, our trees, and our skiers. And so what we're going to do is essentially when you open the menu, the game gets paused. So the skier stops moving, all the animations stop, and now you have this menu at the top of the screen that pops up. And in this menu, you've got essentially a bunch of panels, and in each of these panels, you've got images being rendered. And so in this case, we've just rendered two images of the front. And if you select essentially one of these, and then you this is actually going to be the first thing that we're going to build in this first video. And in the second video, essentially based on the selection made here, we'll make it so that you can add more of these objects to the game. And so in this case, I'm adding a bunch of trees. Perfect. So without further ado, let's dive in. So first I'm going to kind of explain how we're approaching this this very basic menu system. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to draw shapes, very simple shapes to the screen. We're first going to draw a larger black rectangle. It's going to be filled in with black. And then we're going to draw smaller rectangles within this larger rectangle. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we create an offset the top, left, and bottom of each of these squares so that it looks a little bit cleaner. And then we'll have a bunch of these panels. And then within the panel, essentially, we'll draw shapes. So for example, in the first panel, we'll have our tree, just like this. And what we'll do is essentially we'll allow for the user to select panels. So for example, I just clicked on the panel, and now that panel is selected. And then if I clicked on another panel, that other panel will be selected. So essentially the order, right, this is a little bit important with the draw order. We first need to draw the base black rectangle, then the white rectangles, and then the shapes. And then essentially what we'll need to do is we'll need to toggle the color based on the selection from the user. So that's what we're going to do today. All right, let's get to coding. Let me not save that, and here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new menu.lua script. And we're going to use the same class-based system that we've used for our skiers, trees, and Yeti. So we're going to create a menu object, class object. And then whenever we do this, usually, well, almost always pretty much, we want to create an init function. So we're going to create an init function. And since this is a very basic menu, our init is going to be very basic. It's really just going to have the location and width and height of what we're trying to render. So we're going to do self.x, self.y, self.width, and then self.height. So we're going to draw this at the top of our screen, a little bit offset from the left. So we're going to set the x position to 10 and the y position to 10. We want this to span most of the screen, or almost the entirety of the screen, so we'll do the width of 600, and then the height we'll do 50. And then the next thing that we're going to do, again, this is a basic menu, so we're not going to create any functionality for now. We're just going to do a render function. And so in this render function, the first thing that we're going to draw is going to be that base black rectangle. So we'll do love.graphics. Because we want to draw a black rectangle, we need to set the color. So we're going to do that, 0, 0, 0. And then we're going to draw our rectangle. So, dot rectangle. We want a filled rectangle, and then we can just pass in self.x, self.y, self.width, and then finally self.height. that's going to be our rectangle. And then because we're setting the color, we want to make sure we reset the graphics. If not, everything that's drawn after this will be drawn with the color that you've set, in this case black. The next thing that we want to do is we want to render this to the screen. So if we go to the draw function inside of our main, where essentially we're drawing everything to the screen, we're going to call the menu render function. The thing is, so this menu is a variable that essentially points to the menu object. So what we need to do is in our love.load, we need to assign the lowercase menu to the menu class object, just like this. And finally, we need to make sure that we source the code, the menu code, so the menu.lua script inside of dependencies. So I'm just going to add require lib to menu. And so now, let me close this one. If we run our code, we've got our black rectangle menu at the top of the screen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a bunch of panels, so white panels, inside of this. And essentially they're going to be equidistant with a little bit of an offset from the top and the left side so that they fit in the middle of this rectangle. So inside of menu, what we're going to do is we want to draw, essentially, let's draw 10 panels. And what we're going to do is we're not going to pass in new parameters, and we're not going to create a separate class for our panels. We're just going to use essentially the X and Y's of our menu and the width of our menu to essentially identify the X's of each of the panels, and then the number of panels that we're going to draw. So what I can do is I can create a for loop, and I do I is equal to 0. So 0 will be our first panel. And then we want to draw 10 panels. So what I can do, I can do self.width, and I can divide that by 60. That will give me 10. Because we're starting from index 0, we want to subtract 1 here. So this will be 0 through 9, including 0. We want to increment by 1. And now what we can do is we can create a new X value for our panel. So I'm going to do X panel. And then X panel essentially is going to be equal to the self.x of the menu. So it's initialized at the same place. But because we essentially each panel need to be adjusted for the width of the previous panel, essentially we want to add I times the panel width. And we're going to make our panels 50. We're going to make our panels, we're going to give our panels a width of 60. So we're going to do self.width divided by 10. And so now what we've got is for the first panel, it'll be 0. So it's going to share the X value of self.x. And then when we get to the next panel, so panel 2, it'll have I will be equal to 1. And so X panel will be equal to self.x plus 1 times self.width, which is going to be 10 plus 60, so 70, and so on and so forth. And now what we can do is we can draw this to the screen. So love.graphics. We want to set the color because we want to draw white panels. So I'm just going to do 1, 1, 1. And then now we can do rectangles. We want to fill them in. And then we want we want X panel. And then we want the Y, but the Y is, since our base rectangle, the menu rectangle, is horizontal, the Y value doesn't change, it stays the same. So we can just do self.y. And then the width, we said we were going to do 50. So I'm going to do 50. I'm going to hardcode 50. And then the height we want to put in the middle of our base rectangle, and our base rectangle is 50. So we're just going to add 5 pixels to the top and 5 pixels to the bottom. So I'm going to make this 40. Because we need to offset from the Y, I'm going to add a 5 here. And then similarly, our first X panel is just going to be equal to 10. We actually need to make that equal to 15. So I'm going to add a 5 here. And then because we set the color, I'm going to reset the graphics. And so now if we run the game, we've got our menu at the top of the screen, and you can see all of our panels. So now we have 10 panels. Perfect. So now that we've got 10 panels, what we need to do is we need to draw images to it. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a panel data set. So similar to before, where we had created like this tree defs, essentially, which had the definition of like what our trees animations were, our Yeti animations, and our skier animations. We're going to do something very similar, but for our menu panels. So I'm going to call panel items. Oops, panel items, just like this. It's going to be a table, and it's going to be made up of multiple panels. So I'm going to create, panel 1. That's going to be equal to a table, and that's going to essentially have, we need to identify essentially the X, the Y, and then the image that we're rendering. So we're going to do X is equal, Y is equal, and then we're going to do an image is equal. Just like that. So what we're going to do is, we're actually going to add one more image. So on the ski free sheet, we have this smiley sign and then the KO sign. So we're going to add those to our drawing. So inside of our G frames, where essentially we record all of the images from our sprite sheet, we're going to create a new entry called sign. And that's going to be a table, and we're going to port, and trust me on this, we're going to port all of the locations for the signs. So this is essentially where on our sprite sheet the signs are located. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fill in for each of our panels. So we've got 10 panels. I'm not going to fill in all 10. I'll fill in 4. So the first image we'll do tree. And then the X and Y are actually, if we go into our menu, they are going to be the X panel and then the Y panel with the 5 what's it called? The 5 adjustments. So technically our first panel is going to have an X value of 15, 10 plus 5, and then our second panel and our Y value of 15. Just like that. Oop, I'm adding my commas. That's going to error out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create our second panel, our third panel, our fourth panel. Oop, and so let's make this our second panel, panel 2, panel 3, and panel 4. So panel 2 is essentially equal to panel 1. It's got the same Y value, but it's got essentially it's offset by 60 pixels, so 75. And then we'll make you a sign. And then panel 3 is, again, like 60 offset to panel 2, so it's 75 plus 60, which gives us 135. And then we're going to put the skier. And then finally, panel 4 is, again, like the 60 pixel to the side, so 195, and we're going to put the Yeti. So now essentially what we're expecting to see is panel 1 will show a tree, panel 2 the sign, panel 3 the skier, and panel 4 the Yeti image. So in our menu, essentially what we need to do now is we need to loop through all of the panel table that we just created and essentially render the image. So under the white square, what we're going to do is we'll create another for loop, and then we're going to do for I and then panel in pairs of panel items, which is our table, do, and we essentially just want to love.graphics.draw all of this. And then we just need to call end. So for our drawable, what we first need to do is bring in the sprite sheet. So let's call the sprite sheet. And then we want to bring the right frame. So we call G frames. And then the G frames, right, we essentially need a pointer to the right quads. So in this case, we need the Yeti skier tree or sign. And this information is captured inside of our panel as under the tag image. So what we can do is call panel image, just like that. Because we're not going to animate things, we're just going to call the first quad from the table. So we're just hard code 1 here. And then similarly, right, we've passed in the x value, so we can just call panel x, and then we can call panel y. And for now, we're not going to worry about rotation or scale or anything else. And so now if I render this, you'll see expected a quad. All right, I did a typo somewhere. Let's see. Image, panel items. Let me think for a quick minute. I think I need to pull this outside of the frame. There we go. Okay. There we go. And so now what you can see is we have the first 4 panels of our menu are showing the tree, the happy sign, the skier, and the Yeti. Perfect. So now that we've got this, what I want to do is I want to make it so that essentially when you can essentially pause the game and unpause the game, and when you pause the game, the menu shows up. When you unpause the game, the menu disappears. So for that, what we're going to do is in dependencies, we're going to create a new variable. We're going to call it pause status. We're going to initialize it to false. So essentially, it's going to be false. And what we're going to do is we're just going to toggle this from false to true and true to false. And then depending on if it's true or false, essentially it pauses the game. So in main, what we'll do is if the key P is pressed and the pause status is true, then what we're going to do is we're going to set it to false. So we'll set pause status to false, just like that. Else if the key P is pressed and the pause status is not true, so it's false, then we're going to set the pause status to true. And this is essentially going to allow us to toggle between true and false for the pause status. And then in our love.update, essentially pause the game. So all of this code in love.update is essentially what runs the game. So we're just going to make it conditional on whether or not we're paused. So if pause status, if not pause status, so essentially if we're not in pause, then you want to run all of this code, and if not, you don't. So let's tab that and then add an end statement here. And so what we've done here is essentially if this pause status is set to false, then we run this. If it's set to true, then this doesn't run. The love.update doesn't run. And then finally, we want to just make the menu render appear if we're paused. So again, if pause status is true, that means that the game is paused, then we want to render the menu, and if not, we don't. And so now if we render all of this, and I press the P key, the game pauses, the square stops moving, everything stops moving, and now we've got a menu, and if I press P again, it unpauses it. Perfect. Actually, let me bring that back. So the last thing that we're going to do is make the menu selectable. So if you remember, we were going to essentially fill, if you clicked on one of these panels, it would highlight the panel as your selection. And so here what we want to do essentially is we want to track whether or not you've pressed the mouse key over a specific area on our menu. So to do that, in our main, we're going to create a new function. We're going to call it love.mousepressed. And it's going to take an X, a Y value, a button, and then is touched. And so this is a function that's built into Love. You can go to the documentation on Love and it'll explain everything. But essentially, when you press the left button key, you're essentially setting the button to 1. So if button is equal to 1, then what we're going to do is we're going to call mouse x is going to be equal to the x coming from this parameter, and then we'll do mouse y is equal to y coming from our function parameter, just like that. And so now what we're doing is we're storing mouse x and mouse y as global variables that we can refer to in our menu. So inside of dependencies, let me just initialize mouse x to 0 and mouse y to 0. So now that we're able to track essentially where someone's clicked on our window, inside of the menu here, we can essentially track whether or not the mouse x and mouse y are within the panels. So in our for loop, in our panel for loop, essentially, we're going to add if mouse x is greater or equal to, let me think here for a second, essentially our x panel, right? Our x panel plus 5, because we're rendering the panel with plus 5. And mouse x is less than or equal to x panel plus 55, which is the width of our panel with a 5 offset. And then essentially we're doing the same thing as we're doing with ABB collision detection. So we're going to do mouse y is greater than, so here it's just self.y plus 5, and then mouse y is greater or equal to, oh, not greater, less than 40. Then, and then let's just put an end statement here. Then if this is the case, right, if you've clicked on and you're within these areas, what we want to do is we want to do love.graphics, and then we're just going to highlight it in green. So set color. We're not going to do a true green. We're going to do a teal green. So 0, 0, 1. And you know, we'll make it a little bit less opaque so it doesn't hide the image that much. So 0.5. And then love.graphics, we're going to just draw our rectangle. And the rectangle essentially is going to be the exact same size of the right rectangle. So we'll just do that. And then we always need to reset our color palette, just like that. And then here, now we can add an else statement. And we need to add another end statement. Let me just clean this up real quick. Boom, boom, boom. Perfect. So now, when I render the screen and I click on the panel, you can see it's getting highlighted. Oh, but sometimes it's turning black. Oh, yeah, I think like essentially this is a problem where with the AA, like the X value is true, but the Y value is false, and there's no else statement, so it just essentially doesn't render anything. So I need another embedded else here. And essentially, if it fails the second condition, we just draw another white square. So I just need to copy this code here, just like that. And then let's render, press P, and let's try clicking outside. And there we go, no more black square. So there we go. So now we have a very, very basic menu system that's allowing us to select panels. And we've got the images rendering on the menu. And so the next thing that we'll do essentially is based on the selection, we'll let the user kind of draw different things onto the screen. But yeah, so hopefully this was interesting and clear to follow along. I think we're doing some really great progress with this game, albeit a little bit slower than I thought. But I'm very excited to essentially share the second part, because I think like once we start adding new objects to the game, essentially it becomes way more fun, and you'll actually see the skiers get, struggle to make it across the map. So again, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.